Look at the weather.
It's beautiful here.
Non-stop rain.
Oh, man, it is a blazer out there.
It's cold and it's shivery.
It is cold.
Really coming down here.
I really enjoy your weather reports.
From the All Indiana Podcast Network, we're talking weather in a whole new way. From historical events to what's coming up, plus weather news, science, safety, fun facts, and more.
I like where this is going.
This is Weather Weekly. Weather Weekly with Wish TV Storm Track 8 meteorologist Marcus Bailey.
Welcome back. Weather Weekly here, episode number 23. Good to be with you. I am your host, meteorologist Marcus Bailey from Wish TV in beautiful Central Indiana, Indianapolis, Indiana. And always a pleasure to have you along here for the ride as we just roll through the month of July. Man, summer coming to a close. It's crazy. My kids are getting ready to start school. My wife and I were having this discussion about just how much earlier school starts for kids compared to when we went. And my coworker, Drew Blair, and I were also kind of joking around about on set on Daybreak during our morning show and saying, hey, when kids go back in the fall, it's like, yeah, they're not going back in the fall anymore. You know, they're going back in the dead of summer. My kids go back, I think it's either the 26th or the 27th. It's July when they're going back. So it's definitely summer. And we're one of the earlier school districts. We do that balanced calendar or whatever it is. But I know a lot of kids, it's either kind of late July or that first or second week of August. And I always remember, maybe I'm remembering wrong because it's been, a while now. It's been 20 years since I was in grade school, in high school, I should say. But I feel like it was like late August, right? By the time we hit Labor Day weekend, I had only been in school for like a few weeks. So, man, it seems crazy that we're going back, already back to school time here. So, but summer is rolling along, and that kind of leads me into headlines here that's happening locally. Man, we're finally starting to dry out. Last week was a soaker of a week. Had 3 consecutive days of rain. Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And on the front end of that, we picked up, I believe, over an inch of rainfall on Thursday in Indianapolis, just shy of an inch on Friday, and it added up. I wanted to go out and play golf on Saturday. Got a phone call from, I think I had tee time set for Friday morning, one of the earlier tee times. They called me and said, can't do it. We're underwater right now. And it was raining pretty heavily at the time, so I kind of assumed that was coming. But even Saturday, we didn't get a ton of rain once the sun came up on Saturday, and the course I was going to play at had 4 inches of water. And so a lot of the holes were underwater, and so it was unplayable. But we've started to dry things out. But I'll tell you what, it has been an exceptionally wet stretch, and very different from what we've had in years past. To date here, and I kind of factored in because June was such a wet month, and typically it is the wettest month of the calendar year here in Indianapolis. But from June 1st through the day of this recording, so July 20th, so, kind of a 6-week stretch here, month and a half, we're at 13.84 inches of rainfall. So we're over a foot of rain, and that is the 4th most during that time period in recorded history in the city of Indianapolis. So that's a lot of water here. It's the most since 2015 for that period. That is also the wettest, 2015 at 19.97 inches. We were just shy of 20 inches of rain. That was my first year at Wish TV, and I remember that. It was just coming down like gangbusters that year. And I remember several afternoons that we were covering some city flooding going on. But kind of compare that to, so we're over just a foot of rain over this last 6 weeks in Indianapolis. Last year, we were just over a half a foot, which isn't bad. The year prior to that, we were at about 9 inches, closer to 10 inches of rain. Again, not bad. 2018, we only had about 4.5 inches, so that was dry. And we started getting into a real dry period kind of after a lot of those rains, which we typically do. We get into August, we get into September. It's not unusually wet typically around central Indiana. And that's a good thing because we're kind of, once we get into September, we're getting into October, we're getting to closer to harvest time. So you want some dry time there. But a few of those years, we kind of came out of June and July with not much water. And so, you're entering a drier period, and droughts kind of feed on themselves. And it led to some trouble in terms of some very arid conditions across areas. So we're nowhere near that right now. We are very saturated. It's been a while. I was mentioning to my wife coming out of the weekend, because I had to mow. There was not a lot of great days to try to sneak out there and mow because the ground was so wet. Luckily, my yard kind of drains a little easier, but I made the comment, I'm like, here we are in mid-July. Usually you kind of get the blazing heat, and it does start to dry out in spots. I have not had to water my lawn once, and I can't remember my yard being this green this late into the season. So I'm happy about that. That's a good thing. So hasn't been great for allergies. That's been a little bit rough. But other than that, I don't think we're creating major issues. Everybody's got their plants into the fields already, and the corn looks great. Looks like the beans are in pretty good shape. I know there was a lot of standing water in the fields, but we've had a couple of dry days, about 3 in a row now. And so we're going to string a few more together, which we'll talk about the forecast at the end of the podcast. But looks like we've got a nice stretch of dry weather here coming, which will be welcome for just about everybody. Nationally speaking, there hasn't been really much weather-wise going on. The biggest story has been the wildfires in the Pacific Northwest, and it does impact us locally here. And I'll talk about that in a second. But the biggest fire right now is in Oregon. It's been named the Bootleg Fire. It is about 537 square miles. It is massive fire just to the south and east, I think by about 300 miles, according to the Associated Press, from Portland. So it's kind of in the central part of Oregon. But they just cannot get that thing under control. The weather is not cooperating. They've got high winds. They're not getting any rain. It's just been very difficult. So they're asking for some help. Just reading a recent article from the Associated Press. They've got some thunderstorms that they're worrying about, and kind of this dry lightning here. So it's just been a huge issue. They're exceptionally dry out there. They've had 2,000 homes that have had to been evacuated. 5,000 are threatened. 70 homes, 100 outbuildings have gone up in flames. Fortunately, there have been no fatalities out of this. It is approaching a state national forest out there. And so that's going to create its own issues. So that's something that's going to be ongoing and a big problem there. We'll keep an eye on it. But how it impacts us is because of how massive that fire is. And there's also some larger fires going on in southwestern Canada, so not too far away from the Bootleg Fire. That all gets filtered into the jet stream as the smoke kind of goes up in the atmosphere, and it's getting fed through the plains, and there's kind of a northwesterly flow coming down into the Midwest. So we've noticed, they've noticed some more hazy days around our area, central Indiana, but really much of the Midwest, wherever you're listening from. A good portion of the northern half of the country is getting some sort of impact out of this. I've heard reports of people smelling smoke. I have not. The smoke around us in the Midwest is pretty high up in the atmosphere, so there's no real major air quality issues because of the smoke, but it is creating more of a haziness and kind of a milky white sky, if you will. So you're getting more colorful sunrises and sunsets here. So keep an eye out for that, because that likely won't change, at least for the coming days for this upcoming week. Around here. But that's kind of the big story nationally. We really haven't had much in the way of severe weather. It's been exceptionally quiet in terms of severe weather across the Midwest. Where they are dealing with some issues is down in the South. They've been dealing with several days of rain. Been following some of my fellow meteorologists down in Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia, and they're dealing with some flooding where in the last 36 hours they've picked up anywhere between 5 to 7 inches of rainfall with a very stagnant pattern, whereas we're very quiet across the Great Lakes region and the Midwest. All of the rain is getting suppressed down into portions portions of Mississippi and Tennessee and the Carolinas and Georgia and Alabama, where they're dealing with some fog, some rain, and even down in Texas, they've been dealing with some pretty heavy rain. I've seen as high as 7 inches of rainfall down in portions of Texas, and they're going to be dealing with more of that through probably Thursday. Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, northern Florida, South Carolina, even southern Tennessee, probably going to be dealing with some more rain, where it could be a total of 12 inches of rainfall before it's all said and done. So that's going to be devastating in some areas that are already just overly saturated for the last week or so. Just a case in point, this comes from AccuWeather.com. Biloxi, Mississippi now, since June 1st, is now at 25.9 inches of rain, where they should be averaging just under a foot of rain. New Orleans is about 18.5 inches of rain. Same thing for Tampa. Same thing for Pensacola. Corpus Christi, just over a foot of rain, where they should be averaging closer to half a foot. Houston, at a foot of rain, they should be averaging closer to 8.5 inches of rainfall. So a lot of stuff coming down in the southern states. So we'll keep an eye on that. Tropical speaking, there is nothing going on in the Atlantic right now. Nothing really too significant. Even over the 5-day forecast, there's nothing really anticipated. You got a lot of dry air that's coming off of Africa right now. So no waves that are kind of riding through. In the eastern Pacific, you do have 2 storms. Felicia right now is a tropical storm as of the latest advisory from late Monday night. And then you have Guillermo, which is now a tropical depression, not anticipated to strengthen, as both of those storms are running into cooler water in the eastern Pacific and should not raise any concern to the Hawaiian Islands. So some good news there. Kind of just entering a quiet weather pattern for really much of the country. We just got to watch those wildfires and the flooding rains down in the south and southeast. But that's really about it. That does it for the headlines here. Kind of quiet here as we roll on this week of July 19th, 2021. Good to be with you here. Coming up, we're going to conclude my 3-part series here. We will try anyway. Just kind of walking through my path of becoming a meteorologist. We left with me finishing up at Ball State and getting my first job in Lima, Ohio. And so I'll walk you through kind of the process of what I went through in Lima and my journey to get to here, Wish TV in Indianapolis, where I've been for the last 6 years. That's all coming up next here on Weather Weekly.
Audible's romance collection has something to satisfy every side of you. When it comes to what kind of romance you're into, you don't have to choose just one. Fancy a dalliance with a duke, or maybe a steamy billionaire. You could find a book boyfriend in the city and another one tearing it up on the hockey field. And if nothing on this earth satisfies, you can always find love in another realm. Discover modern rom-coms from authors like Lily Chu and Ali Hazelwood, the latest romantasy series from Sarah J. Maas and Rebecca Yarros, plus Regency favorites like Bridgerton and Outlander. And of course, all the really steamy stuff. Your first great love story is free when you sign up for a free 30-day trial at audible.com/Wondery. That's audible.com/Wondery.
Welcome back. Episode number 23 of Weather Weekly. Good to be with you here, kind of just putting the wraps up on kind of my journey here, getting into the world of broadcast television, broadcast meteorology. And I kind of talked about my interest first, and then kind of how I got settled into at least broadcast with radio. And that was in my first episode, and my love for radio. And that's what kind of kicked my broadcasting interest up. And then last week, talked about kind of my college career and kind of thanking all the people that were at Ball State that kind of helped me along my journey. And we left off with kind of how I lucked into a job in Lima, Ohio. Didn't really kind of go through the traditional avenue of, sending out a resume tape and then, getting phone call and that kind of stuff. I'd pretty much almost given up hope and just happened to put up a paper resume, which in most cases, that is not going to get you hired in the TV business, and lucked out. And thanks to a couple in Lima, Ohio, Greg and Kathleen Phipps, who own kind of some low-powered stations in Lima, They have since sold those, but took a chance on me, had me come out for an interview. I showed them my tape, and the next day they were giving me a phone call and offered me a job. So that's where it all started. And I tell you what, I was told by a lot in the industry back then. So let's go back 15 years, right? Because it's been almost 15 years. It'll be 15 years this October for me in television broadcasting, doing the weather. It was, I was always told that it was going to be difficult to get in, but once you're in, you're in. Back then, social media was almost strictly confined to college students. If you remember, kind of in the mid and late 2000s, Facebook opened up, but it only opened up to college students. You had to have an actual .edu email to sign up for Facebook. And I think it was maybe like around 2008 or so, may have been a little bit earlier than that you could get, anybody could get it with any email address. They kind of opened it up to the public. So we didn't have a lot of these Facebook groups that we have now. I'm in for instance, a broadcast meteorologist private Facebook group, but we can all kind of share ideas, talk about our careers, give each other job openings if there's a job opening at a shop or that kind of stuff. Just, normal kind of discussion. They have some specific for different companies. So, when I was part of Nexstar, which is one of several broadcast companies, when I was in Peoria and even here at Wish TV, we were briefly owned by Nexstar Broadcasting. That there's a specific group just for Nexstar meteorologists because there's different things that different corporations will do. Initiatives, I guess, is probably the word I'm looking for. That kind of stuff didn't exist when I was first starting off. There was a website, and I don't even know if it exists anymore, called MediaLine. MediaLine was a place that you could send in your resume reel. So back then, even in 2005, 2006, when I'm going through the process, YouTube was not a huge deal yet, okay? It wasn't like everybody could just easily go in and upload a video and then send the link to a news director and say, hey, check out my latest reel. That wasn't a thing back then. YouTube was a thing, but it wasn't where it's at right now. But MediaLine had a way that you could send in your reel and they would feature you. So you could have news directors contact you. All right. And I'll talk about that in a little bit because I did not know about that avenue. And it wasn't cheap either, but I didn't know about that avenue until I was already into my first job. But they also had a message board. And that was kind of the infancy of this broadcast meteorologist group that I'm in on Facebook here. There's a lot of the same guys and gals that are all part of it. And so that was an excellent place to just get tips from people. I believe there's also a broadcast or a future broadcast meteorologist Facebook group, which is probably a little closer to what that MediaLine message board is now. Because there's a lot of people that maybe aren't in the business but are interested in the business. And so it was a good place for us to ask questions. Should I do this? Should I do that? What should I put on my resume reel? How long should my resume reel be? And even going to a point of, hey, here's a link on MediaLine to my reel. Can some of you take a look? I'd like to hear your opinion on, what I could do better, what can I improve on, etc. So I got a lot of tips on just trying to get through the job process because, look, all I knew was how to apply for a normal job. Was you just give a resume to somebody, put a cover letter on there, wait and to hear call back, and hopefully you get an interview, and then you sit down and go through the interview process. This was completely different, right? You're going to be judged from the get-go. And I learned a lot more about that when I moved to my next job, which I'll talk about in a second. But anyway, got the job in Lima. Didn't know much about the Lima area. I was just excited that, one, I was pretty close to home. I was a 2-hour drive away from home. In fact, it took me a while to kind of get an apartment out there. And so for the first week that I was working in Lima, Ohio, I just stayed at my mom's in Muncie, and that was about a 2-hour drive. Now, let me kind of walk you through the scenario with my TV stations in Lima. There was no weather team. I was the weather team. We only had a Monday through Friday evening newscasts. So that meant we had a 5, we had a 6, went to national after that, came back, we had a Fox affiliate, so we did a 10 o'clock news, and then we do an 11 o'clock news in our CBS. We were done by 11:30. So my shift was basically like what a normal chief meteorologist has in most markets, right? I kind of came in around 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and then did the evening newscasts, and then was out of there by 11:30. Which, I mean, look, that was great for someone at my age. I was just out of college. I think I was like 22, 23 years old. Already a night owl. So I got to sleep in till like as late as I wanted, because I certainly wasn't going to sleep until 2 in the afternoon. And I got to stay up and watch TV and hang out with some of my new friends that I was working with in Lima until pretty late. So it was an ideal shift, but it came with its own problems. I didn't have a backup. If I got sick or if I wanted vacation, I did not have someone to cover for me. So that kind of came with, its own set of issues. So the guy I was filling in for, or I was replacing, I should say, Jason Myers is his name. He had been at Lima, I think, for about a year and a half or so. And he was moving on to the ABC and NBC affiliate in Fort Wayne. Remember that, because I'll be bringing it up here again in a little bit. I basically got a 2-day crash course on his job, and then I was on my own. So I went in to job shadow him, basically my first day. I believe it was a Monday. I went in, the next day and watched him, and he kind of let me play around with the weather graphics a little bit. Back then, I used a system called Weather Central, which was a very popular system. There was a lot of stations around the country that had Weather Central. They were based out of Madison, Wisconsin. They eventually got swallowed up by WSI, to where nowadays we only have 2 weather vendors. It's basically Barron, which is what we use here in Indianapolis, and WSI, which we have used also in the past. That's it. But Weather Central was another one of those. And I enjoyed using Weather Central. We had the bare bones of Weather Central. I really couldn't do any animated maps. We did have a Futurecast. We didn't have like a live radar. So when it came to like severe weather tracking, I couldn't zoom in or anything fancy like that. So it came with some very limitations. I mean, we were talking about the cheapest of the cheap when it came to this weather system, but we made it work. I spent a lot of time on the phone, good people up in Madison. And I was like, look, I don't think I'm getting the most out of this. I know we have the cheapest version, but I don't feel like we're getting the most out of this. Help me out. They were great. They kind of walked me through a few things. So kind of got it working to about as good as I could get over my year and a half, little over a year and a half up in Lima. So, but again, like, it did come with its limitations. My time in Lima was pretty eventful. And I ended up probably getting more out of that experience than I have at any of the other stations. And I'll tell you why. So there was only, I don't know, maybe 10 of us total that worked in the newsroom, because again, we didn't have a morning show. We didn't have weekend shows. And so, we didn't really have dedicated producers for shows. We basically had, we did have one woman that was there that was a dedicated 5 and 6 producer. But the late shows were produced by our anchors. Sports people produce their own show. And what I found interesting was I didn't have to deal with it during football season because I got in there in October. But by basketball season, they had basically trained me to go out and shoot basketball games and edit those. I had zero videography experience. After my next year, they had actually allowed me to kind of produce some of the newscasts. So I wasn't a big fan of that, but I'm glad I did it. It just gave me an appreciation for that side of things. But my point is of how small of a market it is. And man, I'm glad I went through that process, because when I took my next step, it just made me appreciate things so much more when you got into a bigger market. And certainly to the point where I'm at now in market, 25, I think is what Indianapolis is now. It's a big market. It's a top 25 market. So it makes you appreciate what you have, because we had the bare bones in Lima, but we made it work. I kind of look at it almost as an extension of college, but we got paid for it. Not great. We were all pretty broke, but I mean, that's standard, right? When you're coming out of college, that's how a lot of people are. I wouldn't trade that experience for the world, though, because it made me who I am today. And I think it makes me appreciate the things that I have here today. I had a couple of neat weather events. Got to deal with my first, I would call it blizzard. It was the first time that I'd ever been under a blizzard warning, at least to my knowledge. And I believe it was, I wish I had this written down in front of me. I want to say it was near Valentine's Day, and this would have been in 2007. We ended up with about, I believe, 9 or 10 inches of snow. We had some pretty hefty snow drifts. Tough to get into work. We were able to make it work, though. I remember waking up early in the morning and doing lots of radio interviews with the local AM affiliate, WIMA 1150, I believe. And that was just a fun day. You know, it was a long day. I was exhausted, but went through that snowstorm, got to work, was doing updates throughout the day. Social media wasn't a big thing, so there was no Facebook Lives. I think I was updating to my personal Facebook page. I don't think I was on Twitter at the time. So there was no professional Facebook page of mine at that point. So, the workload was a lot lighter back then than it was now. So, I was just basically breaking in on the hour, kind of doing live updates on what was happening, and then kind of going heavy duty coverage into the newscasts as well. So that was my first significant weather experience. I do remember one severe weather event in particular. They had, I believe it was called St. Gerard's Fest. It was a Catholic church that was in Lima. They had a big festival, and they had a beer tent, and they had great food. And so we do live updates from there. And then on our breaks, we'd just go down and we'd eat a bunch of food and then come back. And then we'd go back afterwards as well. And a lot of our coworkers that were already off work would just kind of hang out with us and stuff. One of the best, this is a good story. It's just now popping into my head. So we all go to St. Gerard's Fest. Now, this was a mistake, and if you are a newbie and you're getting into the business, don't do this, all right? I knew that there was severe weather possibly coming. Despite that fact, now, Lima's not a big town, so I could get to the station pretty quickly. But despite that fact, I decided that I still should go and get some food. And so I did, and we took a news car so we could get good parking, because when you're in a news car, for the most part, you don't have to abide by a lot of the parking rules, because, a lot of these events, they're like, yeah, come on in, you're going to shoot some video and blah, blah, blah. So we did. And because we're promoting their event for free, essentially. Anyway, let me go back to the fact that we were a very small operation, not a lot of money. We did have news vehicles. They weren't great. All right. We took a news vehicle to St. Gerard's Festival, and I get a phone call on my cell phone from our assistant news director and said, hey, looks like there's some pretty bad storms heading our way. Can you guys get back here? I'm like, yep. I was like, I've got our food. We're heading back. Get to the car won't start. Not kidding. Car won't start. So we're all freaking out because we need to get back. And now my new assistant news director is calling. He's like, dude, there's tornado warnings that are coming out of Indiana. We got to have you back. I'm like, the car's not starting. Can someone come get us? So we get out of the car. Our news director says that he can't get to us because there was some sort of traffic jam, or maybe he was stuck by a train or something. So we start running with our food down the road, and we kind of meet him halfway. And finally he picks us up, but we get there just in time. I didn't miss any tornado warnings, but we got there just in time. So again, my advice is if there are tornado warnings that are coming toward you, or if you have severe weather, have somebody else go get that food for you. It's okay if you want to get the food. Just have somebody else do it for you. So we ended up getting through it all right. I think the power actually went out when I was going wall to wall. We ended up doing wall to wall coverage for about 45 minutes. And I'll tell you what the biggest saving grace was, because if you remember, I told you I didn't have a live radar. We kind of just had a composite radar that I could go off of. So it was very 80s style, right? The technology just was not there. But at least I had a radar to throw up. I could show the polygons. I couldn't do like storm tracks. But what I did have was I had NWS chat. Those of you that aren't familiar, this is like the first year the NWS chat got on board. I don't remember where I saw the link for NWS chat, but boy, oh boy, has it been a lifesaver for me. Essentially, it's a chat room that is connected with your local National Weather Service office. So for Lima, that was actually the Northern Indiana, the North Webster National Weather Service office. Our southern counties got Wilmington, but most of the viewing area, including Allen County, which was Lima, Ohio, that was under the jurisdiction of the Northern Indiana office. So we had a direct link to them. So if they had spotters, they were relaying that information saying, hey, tornado on the ground in Van Wert County. It was reported near US 33 US 33, I think is one of the main roads that goes through there that leads into Fort Wayne. So we could get that information, and being able, to relay that info while you're going wall to wall was huge, because I don't have a radar that I can bounce around with. I don't have any cameras that I can show. We don't have a lot of live capabilities, so I don't have, and again, we're not in the age yet where iPhones are super prevalent and somebody could mount an iPhone on their dashboard and do a quick FaceTime. It just wasn't around in 2007. So, we weren't able to get a lot of that. We were basically, I think back in that time, I saw it a flip phone. So even if people were able to send us images, the quality wasn't that great. So I relied heavily on either phoners from a lot of these emergency management agencies around the area, or what was coming in via the National Weather Service chat. That thing was huge. So those were kind of two of my kind of weather memories from Lima. After about a year and a half, I knew my time had come. I should mention that I had some great opportunities while I was in Lima. Thanks to some previous meteorologists. I mentioned Jason Myers, who went to the ABC and NBC affiliate in Fort Wayne. He got that job because he was able to freelance on some weekends or holidays for that station that he got hired full time. And they ended up calling on me to help out at around Christmas time. So that was fun because I did have some family that lived around the Fort Wayne area. And I got to help out, I believe, on Christmas Eve. And I also helped out on Christmas night, I believe. And then I came back on New Year's Eve. And it happened to work out on my schedule because it was on a weekend. So it didn't impact my schedule at all, Monday through Friday in Lima. So it was a good experience. It was some good side cash. They didn't call on me all that often, but it was great. It was good to be in a bigger market. The chief there was great. He's not there anymore, but Curtis Smith was the chief meteorologist in Fort Wayne, and it was awesome. And then that also led to some freelance opportunity at the ABC station, ABC and Fox affiliates in Dayton, Ohio. And they actually called on me quite more frequently because they were shorthanded for a time. They actually wanted me to kind of be more of a permanent weekend meteorologist, I kind of backed off a little bit on that. And I'm glad I did. I kind of worried if I was going to regret it. But man, that would have been 7 days a week. And I was a grinder back then. And I believed wholeheartedly before I got married, before I had kids, that, my goal, and I stated this in my last podcast, but if this is your first one on my journey here, my goal was always to get back to Indianapolis. And I was going to do whatever it took to get there. And that meant probably in many cases that I just was going to try to outwork anybody I could. But I also kind of had to weigh my options. I can't do this 7 days a week. I'm going to burn myself out. I love the job, but I can't do it 7 days a week. No way. So I kind of had a back and forth with then news director Pat Casey, and we kind of settled in. I said, look, I can't do this every weekend for you, but I can do several, okay? And I did express my interest and say, hey, I am very interested in coming here full time. It's just, there's a lot of inside things that I don't know about. I still don't know about when it comes to the hiring process and that kind of stuff. And it wasn't in the cards. So my time had started to come to an end in Lima. And, I was still kind of freelancing from time to time in Fort Wayne, a little more frequently in Dayton. And so I reached out to both those stations first and said, look, it's time for me to move on from Lima. I've been almost here 2 years, and I'm ready to kind of move forward in my career. I was hoping for Fort Wayne. Fort Wayne would have been a stop that I probably could have stayed at for a while. I also thought that was a natural step to getting to Indianapolis. There's a lot of people that went through Fort Wayne that then went to Indianapolis, but also thought Dayton would be a good spot. And neither one, they just said, we don't have the openings right now. So I took it upon myself then to start spraying out some tapes. And again, this was in 2008. This will show you kind of how long the process is. So in 2008, I think I started shortly after the holidays. And I just realized, I was like, look, I need to move on. And so I think I had everything that I wanted in terms of a resume tape done by the end of February. And I started spraying things out by March. So everything had to be put on VHS. So that's a lengthy process because, I'm editing everything at the TV station and then I have to dub it down on a VHS. I hate to admit this, but you have to do it kind of in secret because you don't want the owners or your bosses to kind of know what you're doing. So I had to kind of come in on weekends and do this on my own time because I certainly don't want to do it during business hours. I've got a job to do. So I had to kind of come in on my own time and do that. And I'm having to buy a bunch of VHS tapes. Sending VHS tapes out isn't cheap. Had to go through the post office to do that. I couldn't just drop them off in the mail. So, and then obviously it takes some time for them to get there. And I was using the same kind of thing. I was using, TV Spy was the website, and they're the ones that have all these openings. And I kind of sprayed them out all over the place. There was one that I thought I was going to have a bite on, and boy, I was really excited about it. I didn't really want to move away from the Midwest, but I started thinking about it. I'm like, look, I'm single. I'm not married. I don't have kids. Wasn't dating anybody at the time. And I was like, this is a good time for me to kind of see the rest of the country and just get some new experiences here. And I had an opening in Mobile, Alabama. And the news director was super interested in me for the weekend spot. And we kept kind of going back and forth on emails. And then all of a sudden it just dried up. It stopped. And I was like, well, what happened? And I finally got an email from him like 2 or 3 weeks later. And he said that he had gotten fired from his job. But he wished me the best of luck. And and then the new news director apparently was not interested in me, or they were going in different directions because I never heard from that station again. Thought that would have been awesome to live on the ocean. We went to Gulf Shores this last vacation. I didn't even think about that job opening until I went down there. I was like, wow, I could have lived down by here. And it was a beautiful area. We're actually going back for spring break again. We loved it so much that we're going back. So we're excited about that. But anyway, But you just had kind of a lot of those letdowns there, and that's what a lot of the applying process is. And it's like any other job, right? You send out resumes, you hope for something. Sometimes maybe you get a bite, and it's a slow process. What I also noticed is when you start to get bites, they all come in at once. So I got a response back. I can't remember all the places where I sent resume reels, but I sent them to I know at least I sent out 15, had to have, because I'm pretty sure I made at least 3 trips to the post office, and I usually sent 5 out at a time. So I want to say in the whole process, I sent about 15. In the whole grand scheme of things, not counting the Mobile opening, I got only 2 legit interviews, and they came at the same time. So the first one was down at WSIL in Southern Illinois, Carbondale, Illinois. That is in the Paducah, Kentucky, Cape Girardeau market. Pretty big market size considering where it's located, because there aren't really big cities there. It is just an enormous amount of real estate it covers. It's like the boot heel of Missouri, Southern Illinois, and Western Kentucky. In fact, they have 3 stations there. They have an ABC, an NBC, and a CBS affiliate, and each one of those stations are in different states. One is in Cape Girardeau, Missouri. One was in Carbondale, Illinois, or Carterville, technically. It's Southern Illinois University is very close to it. It's near Carbondale. And then the third is in Paducah, Kentucky. So the way it was presented to me when I was talking to the news director there was that each of these stations kind of just stays in their own area unless it was like a major breaking news story, because it takes so long to get to some of those other cities. So the Cape Girardeau city basically just covered Cape Girardeau. Southern Illinois basically covered Southern Illinois. Paducah, Kentucky basically covered Paducah, Kentucky. The position they were wanting to hire me for was a 4th meteorologist. But it wasn't going to be on air because basically they had a morning Met, they had a chief Met, and they had a weekend Met. They only had weekend evening shows, no weekend morning shows. So my on-air opportunities were basically going to be fill-in work. And it sounded like some of my other stuff was going to be one-man banding, doing news. It wasn't that it's something that I was super interested in, but at that point, it was the only bite I had. So I accepted the interview. They were going to fly me out from Dayton, from Dayton, Ohio, and then fly me into St. Louis and pick me up. Now, fast forward maybe a few days later, I get an email from a man named Rick Mole. He was the news director in Peoria, Illinois for WMBD and WYZZ. That's the CBS and Fox affiliates for Peoria, Illinois. I had also applied there, and he said he liked my tape. They had a weekend meteorologist opening, so that was at least guaranteed time twice a week, lots of fill-in opportunity, and reporting 3 days a week. So that intrigued me. It was a little bit better than the WSIL opening. So I also accepted that interview. So I believe how it worked out that week was the interview in Southern Illinois, the first one for the 4th Met spot, was going to be on a weekend. It was a Saturday. And the WMBD weekend Met spot in Peoria was on a Thursday or Friday. I can't remember which now. I want to say it was a Friday. I think it was a Friday, because the plan for me was I was going to drive out for my interview for Friday, and then I was going to drive back, and then I was going to fly on Saturday. In retrospect, that was an awful idea. But that being said, I went about my business. I also didn't want to I didn't want to raise too many questions with my bosses, because I didn't want them asking too many questions, on trying to look for a job. Back then, I should have just been honest, but it always seemed to be kind of hush-hush. It's if somebody was looking for a job, no one really talked about it, right? And it's hard for me to do that because I was the only meteorologist. So I did ask for one day off. The owner's wife basically filled in for me. Not a meteorologist, but she had an interest in weather, and she had a little bit of background in TV, and she did a good enough job, so she was able to cover for me on that Friday. Drove out to Peoria. So here's how the day went. Stayed at my mom's. After my Thursday night show, it was a 2-hour drive, drove straight to mom's. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning. I wake up at like 7 to get out for an interview. It's a 4-hour drive in Peoria. I get out there by 11 o'clock, Illinois time. Boring drive, by the way. I-74, super boring. Got to watch the noon newscast there at, or I guess maybe it would have been 11 o'clock newscast. I can't remember. It's been so long now. But anyway, their midday newscast. No, it was noon. It was noon. Anyway, got to watch that. And then Rick took me out to lunch and kind of showed me around Peoria a little bit. Very cool town. Kind of remind me of a smaller version of Cincinnati. It's right on the river, right on the Illinois River. And they had a cool little vibrant downtown. Neat little town. Lot going on. And then I got to go back to the station and met the chief meteorologist. His name is Chuck Collins. And met with him, talked with him. He was a character, cool guy. And then they had me, which I was not prepared for, doing like basically an on-air audition. And so I didn't know much about the weather graphics. I knew a little bit about the area. I did some research. So I knew some of the town names. I knew some of the interstates that went through there, some of the county names, and got through it. And got to stick around for the 5 o'clock newscast. All in all, I was there for like 6 or 7 hours. Met the evening crew, Bob Larson, Meg Johnson was her name then, Meg Marshall. She got married. Neither one are with the station anymore. One's retired, one's moved on to work for Caterpillar. Both are good friends of mine. So a kind of preview of where this is going. I was not expecting any information. As I was getting ready to leave, I sat in Rick's office and he says, we're going to offer you the job. He goes, I don't want an answer right now. But we're going to offer you the job. We're going to offer you X amount of dollars. It actually ended up being a little bit more money than what the Southern Illinois station was going to offer me. Plus I was going to have guaranteed weekends. And Rick had told me at that point that there was a possibility that I could slide into mornings in the near future. So there was a lot of upside, obviously, for me to go to Peoria. So I was leaning toward that, and I didn't know really how to handle the Southern Illinois interview because I don't know if there was going to be much that the news director there, could tell me that would have swayed me in a different direction. So I think the best thing that I could have done was to be open and honest, and I called him. And I called a couple times because I didn't want to leave a voicemail, but he did not answer. And I'm like, I don't want to not give him the information. So I was like, here's the deal. I had a job interview today, got a job offer from Peoria. This is what they're offering. I'm getting 2 days a week guaranteed weather. I'm getting X amount of dollars. If you can do better than that, and what I'm saying better is if you can match that price and you can give me guaranteed weather days, I'll be more than happy to continue with the interview process. But I don't want to waste your time and my time if, I'm already leaning toward this. And he emailed me back. He thanked me and he said, good luck on your future endeavors, which basically told me he can't match that. And so I never really followed up with him. I don't know if that, caused some strife. They did pay for a plane ticket for me. I don't know how you feel about how I kind of handled that. I feel like I probably handled that the best way I could because I don't feel like I want to lead them on if obviously I'm not interested anymore. I know they went out for the plane ticket, but to my knowledge, I believe that's some sort of write-off for them. So I don't know. But I also had to make the right decision for me. So Rick gave me a couple days, and I believe on Monday he called me and he goes, hey, what do you think? And I said, look, this is great. I tried to kind of negotiate a little bit. This was my first time really being able to try to negotiate. He said, look, we can't do a whole lot here, but he goes, look, if you move up a little bit, then we can talk a little bit. So I signed the contract and put in my 2-week notice in Lima, and I was on my way to Peoria, and I was super excited about it. What's interesting about it is I then got a phone call about a week later, and Rick said, hey, do you remember when I told you that there might be an opening for the mornings? Well, we've come to a mutual agreement with the morning meteorologist that we're just not going to move forward. He's going to move on. So what's going to happen is we're going to move you to mornings when you start, and he's going to slide into weekends until we can find somebody. I was like, wow, that was fast. So technically I was hired as the weekend guy, but I never worked on that weekend shift unless it was filling in. I started immediately on mornings. Got to work with a great group, Lisa Miller and Angelica Alvarez. So it was a co-anchor group, and then myself. And it was, when I look back at some of my memories, that was some of my most fond memories. And I would say the love for this job was probably at its peak. And I had a lot of things going for me during that time frame. One, I had a great group. Lisa Miller is still one of my best friends. We talk often on the phone or via text. Angelica was a great co-anchor to work with as well. It was a very, very fun atmosphere that we were in. We had a great director. We had great floor crews. We had, great producers. We had a lot of fun. We could joke around. My news director was extremely supportive of things that we would do to just joke around and have a good time. Chuck Collins, my chief meteorologist, he was a good chief. He didn't get in my face about stuff. He was a good teacher. It was a very, very fun time that I got to do WMBD 31 News This Morning. We created our own Facebook page. We actually had our own Facebook page for the morning show before the actual station did. And we actually had a really good following. We were the first in the market to kind of do that. So we did that, and then we kind of started doing individual pages after that. But we really kind of embraced being a little bit more social and doing stuff like that. So I was on the morning show there for about a year and a half. Now, in that time frame, what also made this great is let me preface this, and this goes to, because the whole reason why I'm kind of doing this series is kind of walking you through the process of my journey, and hopefully if anybody that's interested in getting into meteorology, you can learn something from it. There was one thing that my news director said to me, Rick Mull, in the interview process that I still use to this day, but I certainly took to heart when we were in Peoria. He took me to lunch at an Irish pub called Kelleher's, which I made tons of memories there. Very cool hangout spot right on the Illinois River. If you're ever in Peoria, check it out. Kelleher's. It's a really cool bar. Anyway, he took me there for lunch. And he said, look, he goes, Peoria is not a large city. He goes, but it has a lot to offer. And he goes, more than anything, Peoria is what you make of it. And I took that to heart. Within a couple of months of me starting in Peoria, I started there in early June of 2008. Within a few months, I kind of started wanting to just meet some new people, and I met this very pretty redhead by the name of Carrie, and we went on a date in Old Chicago in August of 2008, and keeping with the theme of Peoria is what you make of it, in August 2008, we went on a date at Old Chicago, and in October of this year, we will be celebrating our 10-year wedding anniversary. Got married at probably the most beautiful church. My favorite church ever. Sacred Heart in downtown Peoria. That was our church that we attended, but it was also the church that we got married in. 2 of our kids were born or baptized there. So lots of special memories there. So again, that just kind of leads in. That first year and a half was like total bliss living in Peoria. I had a great apartment, in a very cool city, neat nightlife. It was just kind of a fresh start. Everything about it, I loved Peoria. Lima was special. It wasn't a great town. My apartment was not great. It was kind of run down. But we made the most of it. I made really good friends, lifelong friends in Lima. But I think we all could kind of come together in the sense that we were all broke. We didn't have a lot to do because we didn't have money. So we all hung out with each other. Peoria was a little bit different. I was making a little bit better money. It wasn't great, but it was a little bit better money. I was working the morning show, so my social life was completely bleh. How Carrie and I made it through the first kind of year is beyond me, because she was working at the hospital. She also had a second job and she was working nights. I'm working mornings. So we were on completely opposite ends. There was a lot of times I was done with my shift and I would text her and be like, hey, good morning. And she's still not awake yet. But man, it was fun. And that was my first kind of introduction to morning show life, which I have come to really, really enjoy, especially now that I'm getting older, now that I have a family, that kind of stuff. But anyway, moving on through Peoria, there was one day that, I was getting compliments from my news director. He's, keep working hard. General manager was very happy with me. My chief was very happy with me. Like I said, Chuck Collins was great. And I'll tell you this too. This goes back to maybe another tip for you. And I brought it up in the podcast 2 podcasts ago about how I got started in radio. Chuck told me he was an old radio guy. Back in the day, WMBD had a radio and TV station in the same building, and a lot of the personalities did both, which, gosh, that would have been super cool. But he said a big reason why he was interested in me was because I had a radio background. He thought that radio was a vital component in becoming a good meteorologist, because radio is all ad lib, so is television. So he thought that was important. Anyway, my career's kind of just moving along smoothly. About a year and a half in, and I had signed a 2-year contract. And I'll be honest, as happy as I was in Peoria, at that point, Carrie and I had been pretty serious. We're not engaged at that point, but we had been talking about moving in that direction, moving toward marriage. I'd also been very open with her, and I suggest those of you that are single in any job, you do that too if you have a goal that you want to get to, that you're very upfront and open. Because my wife was a lifelong Peoria resident. She had known nothing outside of Central Illinois. And I said to her early on in our relationship, I want to move to Indianapolis. That is my goal. My family's from there. My dream has been to work in Indianapolis. And I didn't want to be that guy, but I'm like, look, if that's not for you, then maybe this isn't going to work. Because I don't want to get in too deep and you not want to do this. I like Peoria. And I did come to the realization as I got deeper into my time in Peoria that I would have been completely content, I think, staying in Peoria. But I also would have regretted not trying to get home to Indianapolis. Anyway, I had the 2-year plan there. I said, okay, I was in Lima for 2 years. Peoria was the next step. That's a market 116. I think that I could make a run at Peoria or at Indianapolis coming out of Peoria. Well, prior to me and my contract ending, I probably had about 6 months left. I got a phone call at the end of my workday. In fact, I was playing tennis with a coworker from the news director and said, hey, can you meet me at the Starbucks north of the station real quick? I was like, sure. And I'm thinking maybe it's like after work the next day or whatever. He's like, how quickly can you be there? I'm like, well, I'm playing tennis. Can I run home and shower real quick? He's like, yeah. He's like, meet me there in like 45 minutes. I'm like, oh, all right. So I'm like, then I'm concerned. I'm like, well, is he leaving or, did something happen? Whatever. So I pull into the Starbucks and I see my news director and my general manager sitting out on the patio. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this? This is not good. So I pull in. They're like, what do you want? I'm like, give me like a Frappuccino, something sweet, whatever. So they sit me down and they were just very frank with me. And they said, look, we tried to renew with Chuck, the chief. By the way, at that point, I think Chuck had been there for like 20 some years, right? He'd been a mainstay at WMBD. And he said, he's not renewing. And so that is leaving the chief job open. And we would like you to take that. And I said, wow, okay. So I was interested because the first thing that played in my mind was, yeah, I want to get to Indianapolis, but this is going to look awfully good on a resume that I'm only 3 years in, and in Market 116, I'm getting a chance to be the chief meteorologist. That's pretty good. And only a year and a half in to that particular station. There are some regrets that I took on there. They waived a pretty good raise for me compared to what I was making. I probably could have asked for more and I didn't because I just said, oh, that's a really good raise. I'd never really dealt with that kind of raise before. The other was they offered me a 5-year contract. The standard at that time is 2. Right now, the industry standard's kind of closer to 3. But because they waived that in front of me, I was like, 5 years. I was like, what's 5 years? I think at that point I was 26, 27. So I'm like, at the end of that, I'm going to be in my early 30s. There's still plenty of time. I shouldn't have probably signed that long. And if I think about it, I don't know if I could have or not, but I probably could have negotiated for the money they were offering me and gotten a 3-year deal out of it, which may have been a little bit better. But anyway, I signed the deal. I'm locked in for 5 years, and I'm the chief for the next 5 years. In that time, my wife and I get engaged. We have 2 kids. We get married, have 2 kids, and all is well. But I could sense in that 5 years, I was jonesing. I was ready to go. I loved my time in Peoria, but just like any job, it's like when you're first there, it kind of wears off. The novelty wears off, kind of like any relationship you're in, right? The newness wears off. And so it didn't have that sparkle like it did in the early years. That first year that I was working in the morning show, or even the first year that I was chief, that was a big year for me. I really started to kind of expand my social media platforms. I went through kind of my first wall-to-wall tornado coverage. There was the Elmwood tornado, and we were on for quite a few hours, got a lot of compliments. Ironically, my competition ended up being my former chief. Chuck ended up getting a job at the NBC affiliate just a couple of weeks later. And so he ended up being my competition. But, those were some of the regrets I had. But, man, it was a great opportunity. And like I said, the only frustration I think I had as the years grew on was that I was so goal-oriented, right? And I had hit every goal. I finally made it into TV, got that in Lima, wanted to move to that next market, got that in Peoria, wanted to start a family in a good town, got that with my wife, got that with my kids in Peoria as well. And there was just that one piece missing, and that was getting to Indianapolis. And it was tough because I just, I was having to wait out this contract. So after about 5 years, I finally was able to get that opportunity. It seemed like things were lining up so well. Rick Moll had stayed my news director that entire time. He's one of the best bosses I've ever had. Super supportive of me, super supportive of weather. And as I was starting to send out some resume feelers, there was only a couple of markets I really wanted to work in. Indy obviously was top dog, but I was also kind of giving some looks to Cincinnati because I think it was time for me to move on too. I don't think I was going to grow anymore in Peoria. And if that's where I was going to settle, that's fine. I just don't think there was going to be any more room for growth there. So I started applying to Cincinnati stations and here in Indianapolis. And I got an interview at WCPO Channel 9 in Cincinnati. That was my first one. I thought the interview went really, really well. And just like Peoria, they had me jump in front of the green screen. I got great feedback from their chief, Steve Raleigh. He was a great guy. And I thought all signs were good. I wasn't getting any bites from Indianapolis. There weren't any openings. So I was like, well, maybe I put my 2 years in Cincinnati. It's close to home. And then that's a good lead in for me to get to Indianapolis. It's even a better chance for me to get to Indy. So as I'm kind of going through the interview process there, right near the end, I got a phone call from Steve Bray, who was the news director at Wish TV. And I had actually met Steve at some weather conferences, and I had tried to stay in contact with him, so he knew of me, didn't know me very well. But he knew of me, and he also knew of my desire to get to Indianapolis. He also knew that I was a big Wish TV fan. And so I sent my resume stuff to him, and he contacted me and said, hey, we've got an opening. Now, mind you, this was kind of in a time of turmoil at Wish TV because at that time, the news came across that Wish TV was losing the CBS affiliation and they were going to become an independent. So it was not a guarantee that Wish TV was going to survive that. That said, I was like, I will take this on. I want this opportunity at least I want to hear what they have to say. And this is an opportunity that I've been wanting. So we get through the process. I thought the interview, again, went really well. Did my audition in front of Ken Brewer and Steve Bray. They said they really liked my stuff. But when it came to the end of it, the CPO interview, the Wish TV interview, within about a week of each other, I went about a month and a half, almost 2 months without hearing from either one. And my contract was to expire in November of that year. So I'm now coming to a crossroads of what do I do? Do I re-sign? Because more than likely I'm going to have to re-sign for a couple of years in Peoria. Or do I not re-sign and now I'm going to just have to put my faith and trust in God and say, look, I'm just going to leave this job that I've known for the last 6 years and hope that one of these two stations calls me. Because I was a new dad, I had two very young children at the time, one that was 2, one that was newborn. I could not just walk away from a good paying job. And it caused a lot of strife within this negotiation of the general manager and the new news director and myself, but I was able to at least get it down to 3 months. During that time, I was told no from WCPO that they were going to find somebody else. I was also told by Wish TV at that time that they were going in a different direction as well. So as you can imagine, that was pretty discouraging because at that point I'm like, well, if they're moving on, there's no openings, we can try again in 3 months, but there's not a guarantee that I'm not going to get the same result. So more than likely, I'm either going to have to resign or I'm just going to have to move in a different direction out of TV. So that was kind of discouraging. Went through the holidays and just kind of refocused and said, look, you know what? I'm going to make the best of Peoria. My wife's family's from there. I'm happy with the life that we've made, and I'm going to make the best of what I can in Peoria. So I kind of settled in on that. And as I was getting ready to negotiate for a longer-term contract, I got another phone call in early February from Steve Bray saying that they needed my help and they have an opening and they are ready to hire me right now. I had about a month and a half left on this 3-month deal. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think it was a 6-month deal, not a 3-month deal. And so I said, well, look, here's the deal. I was like, I resigned because you guys told me no, and I had no other choice, but I had to resign. I was like, I'm going to have to try to see if I can work some stuff out here, guys. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it work. I want to. I desperately want to. So we start trying to fiddle around things and whatnot. And push comes to shove. I had to be a little aggressive and basically had to tell my general manager that, look, I'm not going to resign here. So I would hope that you would let me move on to a job that I want to be at as opposed to a job that I don't want to be at. That was a little bit of a lie. I think I definitely would have re-signed if, Wish TV wasn't coming knocking. So, but I had to kind of take that leap of faith and say, look, I'm not going to resign. To that extent, they said, okay, well, let's talk about, we had to buy out of the contract and all that other stuff, but let's talk about end date and all this other stuff. They wanted me to be more like April. Wish TV wanted me there right now. So what I was able to make work was I was able to freelance on Sundays for Steve and Wish TV, still working Monday through Friday in Peoria. So I was basically working 6 days a week. And then by early March, I was able to come on full time at Wish TV. Basically, I had to get through the February book. So it wasn't easy. I had to make a lot of sacrifice. I had to give up some of my own money. There was a lot of stress. But in the end, I was able to finally say by March, I believe it was March 6th, that I had accomplished the goal of becoming a meteorologist at Wish TV in Indianapolis. And it was a very big sigh of relief. It was a huge weight lifted off my shoulder. It was one of the career-wise, not family-wise or personally, but career-wise, probably the proudest moment that I've had. It was pretty emotional, just gathering my thoughts, because that is this day of me working in Indianapolis, working with people like Randy Ollis that I grew up watching, Dave Barris, Jim Shella, Dick Wolfsey, Patty Spitler, Anthony Calhoun. These were all people that I watched either through my younger age or even through college, that I was able to call colleagues. It was pretty surreal. And that was a pretty incredible moment. And, I mentioned a little bit in the last podcast, look, my job is like anybody else. It has its frustrating days, right? And I say this to school age kids, it is work. Working for Wish TV, working in the good times in Peoria, it's work. If it was something different, I'd be saying I'm going to fun every day. There are other things I'd probably rather be doing than coming to work. But I can thoroughly say that I have enjoyed, for the vast majority of my 15 years in broadcasting, that I enjoy my careers. Yes, there are some days that are better than others. It does make it easier, though, when you do what you love. And the days that are tough, even now, I think back on what I went through to get here. I think about my first day coming in here and being able to say, I work at Wish TV. Going through promotional shoots, and I'm standing next to the likes of Randy Ollis and Ken Brewer and Ebony Dion and Rob Ellis. That meant a lot to me. I was in promos, with Scott Sander and Lauren Lowry at the time, and Kylie Conway and Dave Barris and Lori Wilson. And Eric Halverson, the list goes on and on and on of the people that I've been able to just say, look, I know these people. It was a bit of a starstruck moment when I came here. I'm sure I was probably a little bit annoying when I came here. I've enjoyed coming down to the basement where I'm recording this podcast right now and being able to just look at the archive videos from the 80s and the 90s. And yeah, it's been a very, very cool experience. But I guess the whole moral of this story, and maybe, I don't want to keep going and extending this each week. I think there's a good podcast where I could talk about some of my big weather experiences, because I've had several here in Indy, in Peoria as well. I kind of touched a little bit on the one in Lima, the couple in Lima that I've been through. But I think the journey is what's most important. And what I hope anybody takes away from it is, if you have a dream, whether it is to work for a certain station, whether it's to be on a certain shift, being a morning person, being a chief, going to a certain city, doing certain things, don't let anyone tell you no. Don't let anyone or anything discourage you from doing that. You are solely in control of your destination and your destiny. I didn't know that at the time, but I look back on that. My motivation was probably my driving factor, because if I would not have been as motivated as I was to get to Indianapolis, I probably would have given up, because I was content in Peoria. And look, once you get into your 30s and 40s, if you are a parent and you're married and you've been in a career for a while, doesn't matter if you tolerate that career, you like that career, it's still a grind, right? It is a grind when you start getting into your 30s and 40s. There's no doubt about it. So there's going to be days you're waking up and you're like, ugh, God, I need a day off. I need a week off. Working for the weekend. That's everybody, right? So, I was at that point in my life. I was in my mid-30s by the time I made it to Indianapolis. So I was kind of getting to that day in, day out grind, it is what it is type of thing. Did I take it for granted? Probably. Do I still? Sometimes. I try not to, because I know that there are people that are out there like me. And I know they're out there because when we have job openings, I'm getting emails from them saying, hey, tell me about this job opening. And I always try to be open with those people, because I was that guy 6 years ago. I was that guy that was reaching out saying, hey, what about this opening? Do you think you have a room for a guy like me? So, if that's you, whether you're just trying to get into the job or whether you are kind of in that first or second job and your eyes are forward to that next destination for you, don't lose hope. Don't lose hope. Because I kind of did a little bit, and it was a very down moment of my life. Any of you that have had like a dream just kind of crushed, you know what I'm talking about. And I thought that's where I was at the time. In fact, so much so that I don't know if I got to actually enjoy enough me coming here and sitting back, because I went through so much of the letdown and the worrying and going back and forth with the managers in Peoria that I was almost looking over my shoulder a lot and not being able to just soak in saying, I did it. I made it. Like, this is home. I finally made it. So yeah, don't ruin that moment either, because I don't know if I ever got to properly just enjoy that moment as I should have. So that's my life story. Maybe not super exciting, but hopefully you took something away from it. You get an understanding of where I am, where my passion is. If you're someone that's interested in getting into this business, maybe it gives you some insight on kind of what you have to go through to get through this business. All right. So thank you for checking it out. I promise we're not gonna talk about me anymore here for a while. We'll get to more weather related topics here on the next podcast. Have your full forecast here for the week of July 19th. That's coming up next year on Weather Weekly. All right, here's a look at your forecast for the week of July 19th. We've had a nice dry stretch. Obviously, this podcast dropping on the 21st. Monday dry, Tuesday dry. Your Wednesday looks dry and seasonable with highs in the mid-80s. We will continue to roll along into the mid-80s through Friday. We do start to crank up the humidity a bit Friday into the weekend. It won't be like what we had last week where it's widespread rain. However, we likely will get some isolated showers and thunderstorms starting as early as Friday, and then we'll keep with those chances Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Don't change the weekend plans, but just be aware that we could have some isolated downpours, maybe a few rumbles of thunder as well. So it's something to be aware of as we start rolling into the weekend, likely probably into Monday of next week. Temperatures are going to be warmer as well. We're getting close to 90 for the weekend. And I mentioned the humidity. It looks like dew points surge into the low, if not mid 70s. So that's going to be some oppressive, very tropical air settling in here for the weekend. Cold front moving through Sunday night should bring a little bit of relief from the high humidity values as we open up the work week next week, Monday. Although some storm chances around, not a washout. And I do think it will be a bit more comfortable as we get deeper on into the afternoon. The 6 to 10 day outlook looks drier than normal and hotter than normal, which we've seen on a lot of the model trends. Normal high for this time of year, typically in the mid 80s. I think consistently upper 80s are going to be in the cards, even though we kind of drop the humidity a bit heading into the next week. The 8 to 14 day outlook, more of the same, below average precipitation and above average temperatures. So kind of a quiet pattern. And this is kind of typical when we get to late July and August. We talked about this in the beginning of the podcast. It's when we start kind of starting to dry things out a little bit. That's good news, though, as a lot of county fairs are starting to wrap up and we're getting close to the start of the Indiana State Fair. I know a lot of people are looking forward to that. We're hoping the weather cooperates. Always kind of a hot time of year, but you have to sometimes deal with some of those splash and dashers here. But it does look like the pattern does start to dry things out a little bit. Of course, you can always check up your weather forecast 24 hours a day on our website at wishtv.com. Love to hear your feedback on the podcast or anything else weather related. You can reach out to me via email at marcus.bailey@wishtv.com. You can also find me on social media, Marcus Bailey Weather on Facebook and at Marcus Bailey on Instagram and Twitter. I greatly appreciate your time and hanging with me here as I kind of walked you through my story over the last 3 episodes. And hopefully, for those of you that maybe are interested in the weather field or meteorological field, especially TV, you found maybe some tips or guidance on what to do or what not to do as you are entering the world of meteorology. Best of luck to you. And hey, always here if you have any questions, shoot me an email or shoot me a message on social media. I'd love to walk you along because I certainly had a lot of help along the way to get where I'm at here at Wish TV. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back again next week for episode number 24. Make sure to check out all the other great podcasts here on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
Discover more from Storm Track 8 Weather and Wish TV. Online at wishtv.com and when you follow Wish TV on Facebook. Plus, be sure to check out more great podcasts from the All Indiana Podcast Network now at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.